Hello and welcome to the Streamers and Waiver Wire podcast. I am your host, Josh Shepardson, and you can follow me on Twitter where I post as @bchad50. And rookie running back made a big splash returning after missing a few games with a concussion and being on bye week last week. And that rookie running back is Carlos Williams. He is the first of my suggested waiver wire ads, owned in 68% of CBS leagues, 41.3% of ESPN leagues, and 37% of Yahoo leagues. Those ownership rates are actually down from a few weeks ago when he was filling in for LeSean McCoy. And his injury resulted in some teams kicking him off of their rosters. I mean, with the litter of injuries across the league, certainly understandable that some owners were forced to cut ties with Williams. But now that Williams is healthy, he's a must-own in all but the shallowest of leagues. Unless you're in a 10-teamer, he needs to be grabbed. He scored a touchdown in every single game that he's played this year, all five, 4 on the ground, 1 in the air, has 2 games of over 100 yards rushing, including this game where he needed just 9 carries to burst through the 100-yard rushing total this week, and found the end zone twice. So really had a big effort. I mean, he did everything you could have asked for and more. Obviously, he was not likely a starter for most teams this week as he's serving as LeSean McCoy's backup, but this type of effort shows that he might have some flex appeal even with McCoy healthy. McCoy dealing with a shoulder strain, but it doesn't sound like that's a big deal. That said, Williams is a premium handcuff, and when the matchup's right, when the spread's right, Williams makes for a decent flex play, especially given all of the injuries at running back this year. Number of committee situations around the league as well, so not as many bell cow running backs as we've seen from yesteryear. So Williams certainly makes for a viable flex when the Bills are either facing a really weak run defense or they're in a situation where they are favored and it looks like they'll be able to game flow will work in their favor. Rex Ryan certainly wants to run the ball as much as possible. Got a ton of carries out of both of his backs this week, and also Tyrod Taylor ran the ball quite a bit as well. So did a lot of damage on the ground. That's how they hope to make hay offensively, run the ball successfully, play some defense, and that's pretty much Rex Ryan's MO. So grab Carlos Williams if he's available in your league. Another more widely available option in a completely different type of offense is division rival Danny Amendola. Danny Amendola is owned in 47% of CBS leagues, 21.3% of ESPN leagues, and 26% of Yahoo leagues. Most fantasy experts do seem to be fixated on what running back's going to step in and make up for the absence of Deion Lewis for the rest of the year, who was diagnosed with a torn ACL, will miss the rest of the season for the Patriots. But meanwhile, I'm sitting here wondering why a running back has to be the player who really fills that void left by Lewis. Let's be honest, Lewis is not a traditional running back. His value to the Patriots was as a short game pass catching option, was able to do things after the catch. LeGarrette Blount's still going to have a role because he is the bruising back, but I don't think it's going to be a back that fills that void. I think it's going to be Danny Amendola, and my reasoning is pretty simple. When Deion Lewis missed the contest against the Jets a few weeks ago, Amendola stepped in and caught 8 passes for 86 yards and a receiving touchdown. When Deion Lewis was limited to 39 offensive snaps in Week 6 against the Colts because he was nicked up, Danny Amendola also had a big effort, leading the team in receptions with 7 and receiving yards with 105. So it's not like we haven't seen them up the usage for Danny Amendola when Lewis has either been out or Lewis has been less than 100%. So I think that Danny Amendola, even with the addition of Brandon LaFell to that receiving core, is going to have a pretty prominent role in this offense. I mean, Rob Gronkowski is going to stretch the field. Julian Edelman works well stretching the field or from the slot. And Brandon LaFell is just a completely different receiver. He's a big receiver. He's going to be a vertical threat. That still leaves a void underneath in the short passing game. And oftentimes the Patriots are going to use that short passing attack as a faux running game, basically. They don't necessarily believe that they have to run the ball to have offensive success. And it's hard to argue with them since they are scoring a ton of points, the most points in the league. And that means that I don't expect them to change a whole lot. I just expect Danny Amendola to step in. Doesn't mean Danny Amendola is going to be consistent week to week. I think that there will be some weeks where he disappears because he is a different player than Deion Lewis. He's not necessarily as elusive as Deion Lewis was, but I do think he needs to be owned in everything but, say, a 10-team league. So anything bigger than that, 12-team leagues or larger, whether it's PPR or it's standard traditional scoring, I think Danny Amendola is worth a grab. Moving on to the more widely available options as the streaming plays for this week, we'll start by looking at a quarterback who's owned on more rosters than a player that I would typically feature in the streaming section. But Blake Bortles is grossly underowned. 65% ownership at CBS, 55% at ESPN, 52% at Yahoo, and those ownership rates need to be 75% and higher. He's been very good this year, at least from a fantasy perspective. He has made strides in his second year as a quarterback, and he's pacing for over 4,300 yards passing this year. I mean, he's throwing for touchdowns. He's also on pace for 34 passing touchdowns, so that's quite the total for a second-year quarterback. In 6 of 8 games this year, he's passed for 240 yards or more. And he's a capable runner as well. Underrated athlete, 178 yards rushing this year at 6.6 yards per carry. So really capable of doing it all. His Jaguars are 5.5-point underdogs against the Ravens at Baltimore. The Baltimore pass defense is awful. They're allowing the second most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. They can't defend receivers. The receivers really fuel this passing attack, as Allen Robinson and Allen Hurns have both been excellent this year. Also, pass catching tight end Julius Thomas is a weapon up the seam, but the receivers have been great to Bortles. Bortles has been great to the receivers. Really expect a big week with game flow working in favor of Bortles, having to air it out. And I think he's a top 10 quarterback this week. If you're an owner of, say, Russell Wilson against the Cardinals, for instance, I would certainly be looking at using Blake Bortles instead of Russell Wilson. If you own Peyton Manning, I would use Bortles over Peyton Manning. And obviously there are some quarterbacks on bye as well who Bortles would fill in capably for. Next up at running back, we've got James Starks as a streaming option. 60% CBS ownership, 40.2% ESPN ownership, and 40% Yahoo ownership. And really, it looks like he surpassed Eddie Lacy in the pecking order, or at least pretty darn close to it. He's leading the team in rushing yards this season, despite less opportunities as a runner than Lacy. Lacy's been terrible this year. Lacy's reportedly suffered a groin injury. He has practiced so far this week, but if there ever was a time for the Packers to use an injury as an excuse to get Starks some extra work while not making it seem like they've demoted Eddie Lacy, that would be the time. I mean, Lacy's done nothing to warrant continued usage. He's looked terrible. He looks out of shape. He has no burst. He has no wiggle. He's not making anyone miss. He's doing nothing right now. He is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, first-round fantasy football bust this year. And meanwhile, James Starks has at least looked capable. Definitely looked considerably better than Eddie Lacy. And the Packers have lost 2 games in a row. They don't have any time to screw around with a lack of production at any position, and a pretty obvious place to upgrade within the offense is to play Starks more and play Lacy less. I know the talk continues to be from the offensive coordinator that they need to get Eddie Lacy going. Maybe Eddie Lacy can't get going because he just doesn't have the talent at this point in time, or he just isn't in the type of game shape that he needs to be to really get it going. Starks needs to be owned in all league types, and this week the Packers are big favorites. In fact, they are the biggest betting favorites of the week at home. Look for them to take out their frustration from losing a couple games this week, within the last few weeks. Take it out this week against their opponent. As 11-point favorites, you expect them to be in a favorable position to run the ball, try to establish the run against their division rival Detroit Lions. And Starks is clearly the better back in that backfield. If you own Starks and Lacy, I would start Starks. If you have some running backs on bye week and Starks is available, or you have some running backs on bye week and Starks is on your bench, I have no problem with getting him in there as a really low-end RB2, or more likely a fringy flex. Next up at wide receiver is Kamar Aiken, who is owned in 36% of CBS leagues, 8.6% of ESPN leagues, and 41% of Yahoo leagues. And with Steve Smith Sr. out for the rest of the year, we haven't had a chance yet to see what the run pass distribution is going to look like, as the Ravens were on bye week after in week 9, the first week without Steve Smith. But we do know that Kamar Aiken is the leading healthy receiver on the team in terms of receiving yards and targets. And he's third in receptions, second only to Justin Forsett among healthy players at this point. Being bumped to the top receiver does mean that he's probably going to draw some tougher assignments, playing opposing the other team's #1 cornerback more often than he certainly was going to be with Steve Smith out there. But I'd say that that's offset by the increase in volume and work. Without Steve Smith there, Flacco's going to have to throw it to some other players. He did have a bit of tunnel vision for Steve Smith, and it's really hard to argue with that, since Steve Smith was the best receiver in that offense, and by a wide margin. But with an uptick in volume and less competition for touches, Aiken makes for a decent grab, makes for a solid flex play or an emergency wide receiver 3 if you're thin at the position this week, as he's facing a Jaguars defense that ranks in the middle of the pack in terms of fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. They don't have a true lockdown corner that you worry about taking Aiken out of this game, and I expect Aiken to see enough volume to produce some fantasy points and deliver just enough fantasy points to be worth starting to get through some of these bye weeks. Tight ends thin this week, and not a lot of great matchups for widely available players. Most of the great matchups are actually for some of the better tight ends at the position this week. So I had to get a little bit creative at tight end for your streaming option. And my choice is Austin Seferian-Jenkins. The second-year tight end is owned in 47% of CBS leagues, 18% of ESPN leagues, and 34% of Yahoo leagues. And there's not a lot to analyze here, as Austin Seferian-Jenkins has only played in 2 games this year. The first game was a gem, though, and looked like he and Jameis Winston were on the same page. If nothing else, ASJ is a big target at 6'5" and 262 pounds, making him a red zone threat. He did catch 2 touchdowns in week 1 with Winston, and I would imagine in the red zone he's going to be a favorite target of Jameis Winston, especially if you can't trust Mike Evans to hold on to the football. And Mike Evans dropped a half dozen passes this week, so might see Jameis Winston willing to spread the ball around a little bit more, since it's got to be incredibly maddening to throw to a receiver, hit him in the hands, and just watch the football hit the turf. But that's here nor there. And Austin Seferian-Jenkins has practiced the last 2 weeks on a limited basis, only to be ruled out by Sunday. But the fact that he's been so close last week was not ruled out until Sunday. I do think that we're nearing a return. I think that return is probably going to come this week. Obviously, it should go without saying, but you need to monitor his injury status as the week goes on. Make sure he doesn't have any setbacks. Make sure that he is, in fact, active for this week. But if he is active, definitely the strongest widely available tight end that I'm seeing out there on the wire this week. Finally, we're going to wrap things up with the Pittsburgh Steelers defense as a streaming option. 58% CBS ownership, ESPN ownership is at 37.6%, and Yahoo ownership is at 42%. And while we don't exactly know who's going to be starting at quarterback yet for the Cleveland Browns, whether that's going to be Josh McCown or Johnny Manziel, it doesn't really matter. Would we prefer Manziel to McCown? Yes, Manziel's more likely to make some bonehead mistakes as a young quarterback who's still learning the league. But either way, the Browns are responsible for the second most sacks allowed at 30. They're also tied for the third most turnovers as an offense with 17. It really hasn't mattered who's been under center. They're turnover prone, and their quarterbacks are getting hit and getting taken down. That's a recipe for fantasy scoring. Steelers haven't been slouches defensively either. The men in black and yellow rank tied for 7th in turnovers forced with 15 and sacks with 22. And as the ownership percentages indicate, they are widely available in more than half of ESPN and Yahoo leagues and right around half of the leagues in CBS. If by chance you are digging a little bit deeper, if Pittsburgh is not available, I will give you a bonus play, one that I give with a little bit of trepidation. That's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They were highlighted in my Daily Fantasy Cafe piece. The Blitz, looking at daily fantasy options on defense. The Bucks certainly more appealing in daily fantasy since you have a salary cap to work with, but they also do have some deep league appeal as well. Since they are favorites this week, they are capable of forcing some turnovers and racking up some sacks. So if by chance Pittsburgh is not available in your league and you are hurting at defense or you've got a team on bye, Tampa Bay is your bonus defense of the week. And that's going to wrap things up. Check out fantasyfootballcafe.com for all of the great articles that we have up there and for our very active, very thoughtful message boards with some great topics on the forums and a very active community. So get on there, get chatting with some fellow fantasy football enthusiasts, and good luck this week.